Hello and welcome back, and that is right, we're returning to the subject of DSM 7.3, and in today's video, ultimately we're going to answer the question, should you upgrade? Whether it is that you're a sysadmin with a multi-site deployment alongside your own home lab and you're wondering about whether it's worth risking upgrading to the newest software version, or you're just a home user that's rocking out an old or a new gen system and you're just wondering what exactly is DSM 7.3 bringing to the fold, and more importantly, what does it take away or break? And that's what today's video is about. Now, on the bottom of the screen, you're going to see a plethora of chapters. We're going to be talking about pretty much everything that's been rolled into DSM 7.3 with some demonstrations of things like Synology Tiering there, something that a lot of users have asked about. But we're going to start the video off by sort of nailing down a lot of the questions that people raised and asked in the previous video. So, for example, with DSM 7.3, when you integrate it here, although there is talk about the bells and whistles that you include inside it, some of you asked why their system, even though DSM 7.3 is out, why it's not available to download immediately. And that's because they're doing a staged rollout. They talk about it in several areas of their documentation, but ultimately, eventually, it will be pushed to a whole bunch of different devices that it is supported for, new and old. But at the very least right now, if you do want to get hold of it, and again, wait until you find out what you get and what you lose, you can just go over to the download section, head into DSM 7.3 tab here, and find your system. This is all of the systems here on screen that support the DSM 7.3 update. But, and something else we've talked about in previous videos, but once again to reiterate, if you are running one of these systems right now, this will be the last DSM 7 update for you. Now, that is a wholesale update. You'll still get security fixes and patches, but this will be the last large update. And this is another indication I think a lot of us have had that Synology are going to be rocking into DSM 8 after this. And more importantly, normally when they do go from a big wholesale version like they did with DSM 6.2 into DSM 7, that is generally the line when it comes to the hardware. And some of these are actually pretty interesting. I'm actually kind of amazed DSM 7.3 is going to be available for this system. There's barely any hardware under the bonnet on that one. There's a few I'm going to really be sad to see the back of, the DSM 918 for example, and I'm going to come back to that system later on when I come to tiering because something has really wound me up there. But ultimately, do keep that in mind. The upgrading DSM 7.3, this is the end of the road as far as big versions go. Now, throughout the course of this video, I will be looking at my notes here on the table, so I apologise if you see me looking up and down. That's still all of my plethora of notes, but also I'm in quite close proximity to 3 disk station NASs with a plethora of drives inside, including 30 TBs. So sorry if a lot of that noise gets its way through onto the microphone. But I will say, ultimately, DSM 7.3 comes down to 4 main changes. So if none of these are of interest to you, I think you've already reached the answer to the question, should you upgrade? But number 1, it is about that change to hard drive policy that we've already covered at length. It is Synology's tiering mechanism, something we'll talk about, AI integration into some of the collaboration suite, and smaller changes and upgrades to things like the removal of the exFAT application there because you don't need it anymore because exFAT support is native. Encryption flexibility, something we'll go through later on. Domain management has been improved, and a bunch of vulnerabilities that have been patched. And all of this is detailed in those notes. Again, with regards to some of the vulnerabilities, some of those are kernel based because Synology are using the older kernel. But at least for now, a lot of users are asking, particularly on Reddit, for example, and again, we talked about this in other videos, lots of users are just on the fence about DSM 7.3, and some of them, when they have made upgrades, have noticed some of the hiccups along the way. So, for example, things like active backup requires a re-download of some of the applications there. Some people talking about some of the difficulties they've had with DSM 7.3 integration with existing apps and services, some of them port-based. So again, I will link to this list of threads, and I'll cherry pick some of the ones that are very relevant to those that have upgraded to DSM 7.3 and hit problems, and they'll be linked below. Also a very minor point in the grand scheme of things, because there isn't really any 2025 series RS systems out there. I made a post about this on Reddit, he said arrogantly. But remember, the changes to hard drive support are only effective of the Plus series specifically, not RS Plus series. There's only one large-scale RackStation Plus series now, in the 2025 series. And if you are migrating from older drives from a pre-2025 RackStation system, it isn't really a problem. But it does make me wonder about in the future if a new 4 or 8 or 12 bay RackStation comes out in Q1 or Q2 of 2026, what the position is going to be on hard drive support there. They always had a kind of middling labelled unverified support there, but they never really had the lockout pre-2025 that they're going to have. So keep that in mind with DSM 7.3, but of course, when those systems arrive, they're going to arrive with DSM 7.3 by default anyway, so you're not really going to have a vast amount of choice. I just wanted to include that here for those that were wondering. Also, several users raised concerns about hardware transcoding in DSM 7.3, and again, going back into the release notes, once again, as they've constituted and highlighted before, Synology is rolling back on a lot of HEVC support there, but that integrated further, by integrated I actually mean the opposite of that, by then removing the graphics driver in DSM 7.2.2 for certain devices there. And a lot of you were worried about if you were running an older system, perhaps a DS920 or something like that, that had integrated graphics and therefore hardware transcoding under the bonnet. If you upgrade to DSM 7.3, will you lose it? The answer is no. If your system is not part of the 2025 series that was affected by the removal of that driver, upgrading to DSM 7.3 will not remove hardware transcoding. You will still have access to hardware transcoding on your system. And again, even if you don't, I've attached a guide there, linked in the description, that will help you get it back anyway. So don't worry about that. Additionally, although they do form a part of DSM 7.3's larger related package, I'm not going to be going into much detail in this video from this point forward about hard drive compatibility and Synology's AI console, largely because I made a near 40-minute video going through all of the AI services already as little as a month ago, and the hard drive stuff I've already covered for the last few days alongside compatibility tests of what works, what doesn't in 7.3. So if those things concern you before you upgrade, I recommend you check those out, but keep in mind, at least as far as the hard drive video is, if you're running an older gen system, it shouldn't be a problem anyway. It really is only about the 2025s of what you can and cannot do. And probably another big one, those of you that are currently running DSM 7.2 on an older system like this one, this is, I'm going to say old, it's a DS923 Plus, and inside this system you can see here it's got DSM 7.2.2. Alongside that we can go into the storage manager, and within here not only have I got two non-Synology drives here, which by the way are flagged by the system as unverified there, but I also have two drives inside here, a Samsung and a Micron, being used as caching on behalf of my larger storage area. Now currently this system does suggest I'm using non-verified drives there, something we've gone through. So what happens on this system if we upgrade it to DSM 7.3? Will it change things? Will we still see alerts? Let's crack on and install it. We're installing the DSM 7.3 pack. We're actually uploading it onto the system right now. There'll be a notification letting us know that this is a larger update and what to be aware of. Again, someone in Reddit was talking about changing the TNC, but I think the UELA stuff there, that's already been there in a previous iteration. As you can see, it's saying about certain packages that will need to be changed or will be amended by this system update. But again, we're not looking at that right now. We're going to leave it there. I'm going to fast forward to this DS923 Plus upgrading from 7.2 to 7.3, and just to show what goes on with the drives and the caching, because it's the SSDs more than anything I think people are concerned with, because even though Synology have reversed hard drive, their disastrous hard drive compatibility policy on the Plus series there, they have not changed their position on M.2. You still can't use third-party M.2 freely without using their own drives to take advantage of all the features and facilities. So we can let this system reboot and just double check what happens with both our drives and those M.2s there, particularly those, to make sure that there's no problems or complications where they're no longer usable. Let's fast forward. Right, so let's log into our system here. We've had it rebooted. We've had DSM 7.3 installed. So we can go for that there. Just skip along, device analytics, skip along, boom. So to double check, make sure it did kick in. There is a DS 7.3 update on the DS93 Plus. So let's head into our storage manager. And from the storage manager, we can see, obviously there's no alerts, no warnings. If we go into our volume, we still have access to our cache. So don't worry if you are running non-Synology drives for caching and you're migrating over to the DSM 7.3 platform, you're not going to lose access to those. Next up, how the system handles encrypted storage areas in DSM 7.3 has been made a touch more flexible, I would say. Again, I wasn't hugely in love with the way that the keys were handled by the system on the system, and although you downloaded a local version, how things were dismounted on a reboot and stuff like that. You didn't really have that at your fingertips, as well as just entering a simple password system. Now, a lot of this is kind of small modular improvements that have happened over time, but at least now when we go into the storage area, if we want to create a new shared folder, we can go ahead, call it test share 2, give it a name. We've now got the option there alongside write once read many, which is something we already had. We can encrypt this now nice and simply with that simple password system. Again, not strictly new, but at least now how these storage areas are handled is a little bit more flexible. So we can go that there, and we can unlock it, relock it, and there is more ways and customization which you can do it. So let's save that key there. So we'll just create that nice shared area there. You can see those unlocks there. Nice, we can unmount that nice and easy. And to open them up again, you can go ahead and either use that file that you've already downloaded to your system, or just go ahead and enter the password like so, and it unlocks it. But that does extend to those encrypted volumes as well. Bottom left of the screen there, you can see that encrypted volume I've done there at the bottom. And you can go ahead, go into the global settings, and then from there find out that they have amended and changed some of those encryption vault settings there. So for example, automatically lock encrypted vaults in the case of a system reset, what's known as a class 1 reset, and you can ensure that that is still maintained in order to ensure that data is not only secure, but then someone can't reset the system and then mount that volume if they really want to. And again, a lot of the settings there in the encryption vault are available to be browsed. It's small tweaks and improvements. I'm a little happier about the way the encrypted system on here is now handled via that vault. Now, if you're considering moving into DSM 7.3 because you want to try out some of the new apps and services, it's worth remembering that you may, in some cases, you don't need to do that. And some of the bells and whistles you can still access in DSM 7.2 via the beta program there. So, for example, Synology Drive has released their version 4.0, and on their 4.0 version of both the beta and the client there, it enhances things like better customizable labels that are shared between other users, file requests, rather than just getting the shared link. You can actually request and put in information about why you, the user, need to access that file, and you even in some cases don't even need to use a Synology DSM account to do so. On top of that, you've also got improvements with regards to file locking, with manual file locking, something we've already had available in other services, but just not in Synology Drive. Again, I strongly recommend heading over once again to the article on DSM 7.3 from Luca over at BlackVoid. We talked about it in another video. It goes into way more detail about Synology Drive 4.0, what it can and can't do, and what it brings to the fold. But the key thing is, if you head over to the beta program page, you can see the beta program page here with DSM 7.3 listed, and there you can see Synology Tiering that we're going to talk about in a moment, alongside the Synology Virtual Machine Manager beta, because a lot of users were wondering about support of certain virtual machine platform and protocol as things moved into DSM 7.3. But if you go to the top there and bring the tab down to DSM 7.2, you can still take advantage of the Synology Drive beta there. So don't upgrade to DSM 7.3 thinking you want to test out the new Synology Drive facilities. You don't have to do it to enjoy that. And likewise, you don't even have to do it that way. You can just head straight into the application center, select the beta packages option there, and depending on your version of DSM, you will have access to different beta apps and services there. And as you can see, Synology Drive was ready to rock there in DSM 7.3, but crucially still in DSM 7.2. If you are more interested in what exactly Drive 4.0 brings to the fold and the nature of some of that file request stuff, the release notes, they're a little patchy, frankly, but there are a couple of videos online. I haven't made one yet, but there are others out there detailing just how that spans out in the beta. So I recommend you check those out. Just a quick note, do keep in mind that if you are going to be using some of the extra Drive 4.0 features, you do need to bind them with your online Synology account in order to take advantage of some of those features. I'm not sure why, I don't know if it's an analytical thing, but none of these are features. The 3 new features of Drive 4.0 are not available on the base application unless you activate it via your online Synology account. Which brings us to Synology Tiering. Other than that whole 2025 Plus series hard drive restriction being removed, Synology Tiering is probably the most appealing reason for some sysadmins and some large-scale Synology users to migrate into DSM 7.3 right now. Keep in mind it is still in beta, and this is not a platform or a service that you can use in a single system. This is for multi-site deployments there. This isn't comparable to something like QNAP's Q-Tier program, where you could have a NAS that's got hard drives, SATA SSDs and M.2 SSDs, and then have hot, warm, cold. This isn't about that in a single system. If you're not running multi-site, there is no point here. Now I'm going to talk about what it can do, what it can't do, and go through some demonstrations here on these three systems first. But before you even have to watch that and sit through it, there is one major niggle that was found and spotted very early doors by BlackVoid. And that was when you go through all of this, and you go into the release notes then, it talks about which systems are compatible with this. It's worth highlighting, this does not go into a lot of detail about which systems support hot and cold tiering. And it's really important, because if we go in to the tiering section of BlackVoid's article, and there's a whole independent section about this, the kicker is the models that can support hot and the models that can support cold. Now, cold, for the uninitiated, which will be weird if you're watching this video at this point, is your long-term storage. You're not accessing it that much. Think of it as archival, really, but maybe with intermittent access. Some of these aren't surprising. Big old massive systems that store horrific amounts of data there, and it goes down pretty low as well. But the hot tier is perplexing. Now, maybe, as I outlined in this article, it's Synology trying to bump the old sales of the new units, but for the hot data tiers, the list isn't just really small, but some of the systems are baffling. The DS225 Plus is hard drive only, has no M.2 slots whatsoever. It only has a single, it has a 2.5 gig network port on the rear alongside a 1 gig network port. Doesn't have a lot of connectivity. Some of these obviously are upgradable, and some of them, like the XS, makes a lot of sense. But there are obvious omissions. The DS923 Plus is not on here. The DS923, which has 10 gig upgrades, which has M.2, which has much more memory to hand, that is just the tip of the iceberg. Look at the list of cold versus hot. And again, this wasn't really found anywhere on the official release notes there. So once again, massive tilt of the hat to look over at BlackVoid. But a huge thing to keep in mind, if you are considering upgrading to the DSM 7.3, your system may not support the hot tier, which is probably incredibly important for a lot of users. But let's crack on. We're going to go to a system that can bafflingly support the hot tier, and that is the DS425 Plus there. So if we go into our Synology Tiering application, we've already installed it from the beta section there. We give our plan a name, so we're going to call this one tier test, and then we select our cold tier if it's on the local area network. As you can see, they do appear there. So again, we'll go for the server name there. We're going to use the 923 Plus as our target. How weird is that for the cold tier? Again, we've got the port identifiers there. If we've created customized ports, which I haven't here, you'll have to change that up. And authentication there, we're going to have to enter our login credentials. So I'm just going to go ahead, and now we're going to set up our tier on this system. Why not remain signed in? Interestingly though, I'm just going to cut in really abruptly here. It's worth highlighting that if you are running a system that uses it only for cold, the application service isn't really here after I've installed it. As you can see, I've gone to the package center, gone into the beta apps, found it there, installed the application, as you can see there. But of course, this is a cold target system. I'll investigate this a little bit more. If we go into this one, we've got Synology Tiering on the DS225 Plus, but of course, this one can be used as both a hot and a cold tier. But the DS923 Plus here, even though I've got the app installed, there is no record of it in the App Center. If I refresh that tab, just to double check that there's no sign of it. But if we go into the DS425 Plus, there it is, ready to go, already paired up with this system. I've selected the volume. We can go ahead and start our tiering. So again, we're going to just tier ahead with the folders. Again, there are limitations to what you can use. So for example, Synology Drive folders can't be used. Synology Drive folders are generally already going to be synchronized elsewhere, so I assume until they properly integrate Drive into the tiering system, it's going to be difficult to do that right now. But nonetheless, let's crack on next. And now is where we can choose the tiering policy. So again, modifications of when files will be moved, keyword there, not copied, moved into the cold tier. You can set that up. And again, this is not dissimilar to what we've seen with encryption as well, with some of the deadline times. And then files that are not accessed. So not accessed and not modified, obviously slightly different ruling there, but we can go ahead and just set that to 30 days as well. So next up, we can go for the tiering mode. This is where we're going to set the schedule of when the system is going to be actioning a lot of this tiering back and forth, because again, it will be using system resources. And depending on the complexity and the power of your system, again, a DS225 Plus Y, regardless of the complexity of your system, there is going to be a system impact there. So obviously, as you can see, they've purposely selected outside of office traditional hours, Monday to Friday, in order to do this. So there's the integrity check stuff that we've seen already before. And depending on the system you're using, weirdly, going back once again to this whole idea of what's supported, I'm surprised they didn't lock out some of the ECC systems to be dedicated for the hot and cold tiering, but that's a conversation for another day. But at the very least, we've got those integrity checks there in place that could be actioned on a schedule. So we go ahead, we select the ready to go option there, and as you can see, it's just letting us know that there are potential issues, just letting us know that the home service will be paused on the system while things get set up. And then from there, we can begin and set up our tiering plan. So from here, we can go into the tiering dashboard. So on the destination system here, if we refresh that DS923 Plus, we can see if it's affected any visual changes there on screen. I'm not really seeing anything there, no changes whatsoever. And heading back into the 425, let's navigate some of our options. Now, the tiering system is still very much early doors, I would say, in terms of customization and configuration. One of the other things it's worth highlighting, and we sort of touched on it earlier on when we were setting up a plan earlier on, is just how little it's integrated currently with utilizing other Synology services right now. So the DS225 Plus here, if we log into the other system we've got, I've already got a few shared areas on here using different services. Some of them are encrypted storage areas. Some of them are using Synology Drive. And as you can see, for one reason or another, for example, encrypted folders can't be used, encrypted folder can't be used, team folders can't be used. It's still very early doors how it's being integrated. I completely understand why, because as they detail themselves, certain shared folders are going to have different other uses that are just going to mess around with this, as I touched on earlier on. But when it comes to the configuration of your local system for tiering, as you can see here, the volume capacity that you can set for when tiering capacity is being hit. So remember, so this is, when we look at this side here, we've got the new folder that's opened up in tiering homes, how data is being moved back and forth between these systems, and how much during regular tiering operations, how much storage is being utilized locally and remotely. But not unlike something like snapshots, when you have a retention policy, this means that the oldest tiered data in this repository will then be overwritten by that newest, most worthy data, if you will. And you can adjust that quite significantly there. Again, you can move it up in terms of gigabytes, terabytes. Obviously, it's going to scale remarkably when you're looking at some of the larger scale systems detailed earlier on in terms of what can be used for the cold data set. But really, at the moment, the configuration options and what you can play with is still pretty darn limited, and adapting some of the plans. So as you can see there, when the next tiering is going to happen, obviously I've set it outside of working hours there, the target folders, and you can edit it, but again, very little that you can change realistically. If you've added new files and folders to the other NAS device that you want to head over to in terms of cold data, you've got that. You've got the retention policies that you can change, and the scheduling is still very early days for that policy, and it's a real shame again that it's not a localized feature, because I think there is demand for it, particularly with some of their more modern systems having, for example, the 1825 Plus, 8 SATA bays and 2 M.2 bays is a great way. You could have had a 3-tier storage system in unit. Ultimately, as it stands right now, you know, maybe if I ran this across 4 or 5 systems larger scale over the course of, say, a couple of weeks or a month, then maybe, as it stands, Synology's tiering system would justify the upgrade to manually switch up to DSM 7.3. But at least as it stands right now, and they do label it as beta in most places, apart from within this page we're seeing here, for me personally, I don't think it's ready for that upgrade. And it shouldn't be one of the reasons that you upgrade to DSM 7.3, because I don't think the feature set is quite there yet. I'm not going to question the usability of tiering. I do think it's really, really useful. I think it's a great little feature to have, and especially if you are running one large-scale central unit and all of your, let's say, your smaller offices, if you've got startups or if you've got client members dotted around all over the place, this is a great system for that. I just don't think it's justifiable right now to scale up towards DSM 7.3 solely based on this. And also because, let's face it, until they work out the kinks with other apps and services, which no doubt your connected partners are going to be using, again, Synology Drive being the greatest example, I just think Synology Tiering right now just doesn't have the flexibility within its own ecosystem to be worthy of that large-scale upgrade. But you can integrate cloud services, as you can see, and this is where they start talking about using those other services for backup, using other services for the hybrid stuff, using localized caching, and that's fine. but it doesn't feel like it's properly integrated yet. Also, seriously, what is going on with this model ID choice for the hot tier there? It just seems bonkers to me. Bottom line, and returning back to the whole point of this video, do I think you should upgrade to DSM 7.3 if you're happy with 7.2? No, I don't think you should. I don't think the bells and whistles and the extras that 7.3 brings to the party are worth it at this stage, because the majority of them are things that you can already get on non-2025 generation devices. Now, I add that stipulation because if you are using a Synology 2025 generation plus series device, definitely upgrade to 7.3. If you're using a 2025 generation device like that large-scale RackStation system, that isn't even benefiting from those hard drive changes, stick with 7.2 for now if you can. Obviously in the future, this point is going to be moot, because within the next 5 to 6 months, all of the devices are going to arrive with this by default, and Synology will possibly cull back old versions on their download section. But at the very least, if you are running a pre-2025 generation device, there isn't enough meat on the bone here for me to upgrade, or at least recommend upgrading to 7.3. At the very least, we know that if you're running a pre-2025 generation device, if you have the integrated graphics on board and hardware transcoding, you are not going to lose it. Again, if you are running things like M.2 NVMEs for caching and you move up to DSM 7.3 and your device came out before the 2025 series, you won't lose access to those drives. And several of the features that we talked about today, from Synology Drive to Synology Tiering, is still available via the beta section for you to try out anyway. That's the point I'm making. Users who are running multi-site deployments still have a means to test this out in their smaller scale environments without jeopardizing mission critical data. Also, and I touched on this in another video, Synology didn't roll this out in beta. A lot of the time in the past when Synology have rolled out versions of their software, it has generally been in beta for a while, but DSM 7.3 has not arrived in beta, although individual apps and services has. This has been rolled out kind of a shadow drop out of the blue, and judging by the odd little kinks along the way that people have spotted, again, not just Reddit but other forums as well, it is a good enough reason for me to recommend maybe holding back on that upgrade at least until early 2026 at the very earliest, because you want to see some of those little crinks and cranks being worked out of the system along the way. There are benefits, of course. I like some of the changes that have been brought in on encrypted storage areas, and I definitely like the fact that vulnerabilities have been addressed in the new DSM 7.3 update, although I do wonder why they couldn't have been addressed in DSM 7.2, unless it is representative of a kernel upgrade and therefore it would have been possible and just easier to wipe the slate clean. Again, postulating, no idea if that's the case. And even if you're running a legacy device from 2017, 18 or 19 and you're wondering about this upgrade, keep in mind, again, as mentioned earlier in the video, that a lot of those devices, as low as the DS119J and some XS and XS Plus series devices from 2017 and 18, this will be your last upgrade, your last large-scale upgrade from Synology, other than security patches afterwards there. So you don't have to rush in, you're always going to have access to it anyway. Ultimately, DSM 7.3 feels like a very light upgrade, where most of the improvements that I can see have been involved in individual apps, most of which you can still get. So therefore, rolling out into DSM 7.3 right now feels unnecessary across the board for most users. Not absolutely everyone. Again, if you're running a 2025 series device, definitely it might be beneficial to you. And I'll just end on a note that everything I'm seeing right now indicates to me that Synology, if not already, it's not going to be a surprise to many, have largely started washing their hands of DSM 7 and moving on to DSM 8. And to roll out DSM 7.3 in this fashion right now is because it feels like they're just trying to get it out the door so they can concentrate on DSM 7.8 and whatever that is going to be and what form that's going to be. But let me know what you guys think. I hope you found this video helpful. If you have, let me know. And there are links to all of the articles that I've talked about today. Not only my own, of course, but definitely Luca from BlackVoid and a few other Reddit threads that I found that are quite good, touching on some of the points in DSM 7.3 rollout that have been less than great. I do recommend you check that out. But apart from that, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.